Now we have Milotic. Milotic is in many ways a depiction of beauty in the Pokemon world, said to be the most beautiful of all. Its name is partly derived from the Venus de Milo, and it was unique upon its arrival in Generation 3 for its evolution being dependent on its beauty condition. As if the ordeal of catching Feebas in the first place wasn't enough, this elegant sea serpent serves as a serene counterpart to the raging Gyarados, similarly evolving from a weak fish, and with an extraordinarily similar stat spread. So, how good was Milotic actually? And in this video we'll be covering these competitive formats. Bulky water has been a household competitive Pokemon term for a very long time now, and Milotic is perhaps the purest example of that. Water types are notorious not just for their excellent typing, but also for their well-rounded stats. Thus, they are often defensive cornerstones in their metagames, and nowhere was Milotic more prime for that than the generation where the bulky water phrase originated, Advanced. It was one of the defining members of the metagame. Thanks to the physical special split being type-based in this generation, Milotic had no physical weaknesses, and thus was able to both tank hits from the Titans of the tier such as Tyranitar, Metagross, and Salamence, stay in prime condition for dealing with them through the course of the game with Recover, which back then had 32 PP, and all the while threatened them back with Ice Beam, plus a Stab Surf coming off of its quite solid base 100 special attack. It was at the top of everyone's threat list. He even held off some variants of the always dangerous Suicune, one of the scariest Pokemon in Advance from the special side. Offensive waters often struggle with defensive waters, and Milotic was usually the defensive water. If your team was weak to Milotic, it was extremely tough to dance around. Toxic and Hypnosis let it spread status easily, and thanks to its unique ability Marvel Scale, status would make it even tougher to break. Some abused this with Rest Talk, but Recover was just all around superior. Refresh was also used on occasion so Toxic wouldn't wear it out. The status spreading tough to crack bulky water is a Pokemon stereotype that has lasted through the generations, and Advanced Milotic is one of the first true examples of it. Metagross often targets Milotic with its explosion, since it's willing to sacrifice itself to give Salamence a shot at sweeping. Metagross is hugely important defensively, so this says a lot about how important Milotic is to get out of the way. And what also says that is the fact that the usually far inferior Gyarados is sometimes used almost solely over Salamence because it isn't weak to Milotic's Ice Beam. Milotic also notably stands in the way of mixed sweepers such as Salamence, Tyranitar, Flygon, Weezing, and Blaziken. Its tremendous special bulk and pure water typing in addition to Recover mean that the simple hidden power grass they can slap on for Swampert will get them completely stuffed by Milotic. Sometimes they'll run Toxic almost solely for it, but Refresh ends that. And even without Refresh, it still has Recover and gains a defense boost, so it's still very tough to crack. Of course, Milotic isn't perfect. Lack of a rock resistance can put it in trouble against Choice Band, Tyranitar, and Aerodactyl, and it is affected by the ubiquitous Sandstorm and Spikes. This can impede its walling ability. Choice Band Salamence will now 2-hit KO it 77% of the time in Sand, and 14% outside with one layer of Spikes, for example. Thus, it's often paired with anti-Spikes measures such as Magneton or Claydol. Recover is also obviously a big boon, but it tends to need support or it'll fall flat in longer games. These Pokemon are helpful overall since Milotic struggles against defensive teams, since it won't actually do that much to Blissey, Celebi, Zapdos, and Jirachi. The support is worth it though, because Milotic is an utter champion against offensive teams. It can even use its numerous switch-in opportunities to nab a Hypnosis on something, which can be lethal if paired with Dugtrio. It's a fairly common sight on dedicated trap teams, thanks to how much defensive coverage it packs into one slot, thus making up somewhat for the frailty of the two trappers. Milotic has been seen on many successful tournament-winning teams throughout the generation, and every advanced player knows her worth. Milotic reigned among the early days of Diamond and Pearl, standing up to even the fierce Garchomp, able to handle new threats such as Heatran and Infernape with beefy special defense, the highest of any water Pokemon in OU, taking on various Draco Meteors. Rock types gaining a special defense boost in Sand meant its Surfs didn't strike fear into Tyranitar anymore, but it was still a fine all-purpose wall that put in game-to-game performances. Some people experimented with the new item Flame Orb to gain an automatic defense boost, but that was only ever a gimmick. However, as the generation wore on, Milotic's overused usage hovered around the underused cutoff. Vaporeon was its main competition. Milotic was still occasionally used in overuse, but in underuse it solidified itself as a superstar even more effective than its previous generation overused counterpart. There, the only question anyone ever had about it was whether it or Venusaur was better, and often half the justification for Venusaur was dealing effectively with Milotic. These two alongside Registeel made for fierce defensive cores on the ever-popular popular balance teams. DPP Underuse is known for its fire, water, grass trios, and Milotic was the defensive water part. It was so effective it could really run almost anything it wanted and remain not just useful, but dominant. Toxic Croak seemed like a good choice thanks to Dry Skin, Toxic Immunity, and setup moves to go with its solid offensive prowess, but Milotic could simply tack on Hidden Power Psychic and call it a day. It could run offensive Life Orb, and even the rarest of sets with Choice Scarf on occasion. While it was always using special attacks and water stab, it had a ton of variance within those restrictions. Its defensive sets were of course as good as ever, and a major part in helping fending off dangerous Pokemon such as Houndoom and Kabutops. It gained Haze, allowing it to help deal with other boosters such as the Dragon types, or Swords Dance Relegator, Curse Registeel, and Calm Mind Clefable. The only time Milotic ever really ran into competition for the defensive water slot was Blastoise, who had Rapid Spin but lacked recovery, and Slowbro, who resisted fighting and had higher physical defense but had much lower special defense, speed, and had additional weaknesses to Dark, Ghost, and Bug. While these were absolutely fine Pokemon and were used effectively quite often, especially Blastoise to help facilitate the use of Moltres, Milotic was consistently the queen of usage stats for a reason. Lastly, it had a minor surge in overuse at the end of the generation. Vaporeon's Wish passing was nice, but required Protect so it could receive them itself, and Milotic's ability to use 3 different moves, especially Ice Beam, which Vaporeon usually lacked, was notable. Its naturally high speed also helped it deal with huge threats such as Breloom and Choice Band Tyranitar, while retaining its defensive investment, which Vaporeon could never dream of doing. And in Generation 5, Ferrothorn was such a defensive juggernaut that it completely invalidated most of the bulky waters everyone knew and loved, in favor of those that could reliably harm it somehow. Jellicent and Rotom Wash both used Will-O-Wisp. The former had Taunt and the latter had Volt Switch. Those two, in addition to stronger Pokemon such as Latios, Terrakion, and the new and improved Technician Breloom, made life difficult for Milotic, and thus it never really had a presence in overuse, until somewhat recently, when certain players experimented with its new tools. Scald was the biggest one, of course, but between the buff Magic Code to prevent spikes, the new Dragon Tail for all sorts of havoc, and the Generation 5 sleep mechanics, making Hypnosis a serious threat in addition to Pokemon such as Garchomp, Landorus T, Keldeo, and Dragonite around for it to handle, Milotic found a decent niche in post-Black and White overused. In underused, it played mostly the same defensive role without the offensive options since Suicune was around to outclass it. It had its fair share of water-type competition, with many previous OUs joining the ranks and thus fighting for a team spot with Suicune, Swampert, Kingdra, and Polion, and the new Regenerator Slowbro, and Intimidate Quillfish, as well as the previous generation struggle with Blastoise. Plus, while Venusaur was now overused thanks to Chlorophyll, Roserade and Shaman were now underused, and the former was ready to spike all over Milotic, while Zapdos dropped down as well. What our beautiful fish had to offer was dominance of Chandelure, whose powerful Shadow Balls blitzed through most other waters. However, it wasn't used that much, but it wasn't because it was bad. It simply had a lot of competition. If one knew its niche though, it'd be very effective and could tie certain teams together, whereas otherwise they'd crumble to threats like Yanmega and Scrafty if they were packing a Slowbro instead to handle the dangerous Victini and Darmanitan. And in Gen 6, just like the other perennial fan favorite, Flygon, Milotic just missed out on gaining a Mega Evolution, unlike its counterpart Gyarados. And who knows what it could have turned into, maybe become part Dragon or Fairy? Anyway, it was the same old generic bulky water in a generation that was increasingly cruel to its walling passive damage tactics, with Clefable walling it alongside everything else, and strong Mega such as Gardevoir hammering it. It gained competitive, but that wasn't much to save it from another stint in underuse. It wasn't seen much there, but it handled the new Megas such as Aerodactyl and Blastoise pretty well, while dealing with dragons such as Hydreigon and Kyurem decently. However, its old foes were all back, and it gained new ones along the way. Tentacruel, Mega Sceptile, Heliolisk, and many more. Thus, it wasn't used much, although it was still effective when it did see use. Now for VGC 2015, Milotic became a major player in the VGC scene this year, seeing high amounts of usage. Its competitive ability makes it a top tier contender as it pairs fiercely with physical attackers, especially big bad Mega Kangaskhan. The biggest issue for those physical attackers was being intimidated by the common Landorus T and pre-Mega Evolved Salamence, which Milotic flipped the tables on by gaining a +2 special attack boost after an Intimidate. This was of course paired with its bulk and water typing, and thus translating to an ability to handle Garchomp, Talonflame, and Aegislash, and capable of controlling speed with Icy Wind, as well as even Choice Scarf, which turned it into a huge potential threat that enabled the best for its teammates. Milotic walled what it was supposed to, such as the mainstay Aegislash and newcomer Heatran, and threatened Scald Burns on the bulkier Pokemon. It even helped slow the first Pokemon down while being tough to kill even by Pokemon like Thundurus. Throughout the year, it was used by many players across regionals and nationals, notably used by Ashton Cox, who got second at Massachusetts regionals, Michael Garrett, who got first at the Kansas regionals, Cash Costa and Jake Underwood, who got 5th and 3rd respectively at the Florida regionals, Eddie Guru Fernandez, who got 5th at the Brooklyn Alpha Series Premier Challenge, Luis Miguel Hernandez, who got 6th at Mexico City, BIDC 4th at Japanese Nationals, Sean Rosani 5th at Australian Nationals, Adrian Bauman, who got 8th respectively at the German Nationals, Matthias Matthias Szuchodolski and Miguel Marti Della Torre, who got 5th and 6th respectively at the UK Nationals, Rafael Paul, and once again Miguel Marti Della Torre, who got 3rd and 4th at the Italian Regionals, Xenoblade Hero, who got 8th at Birmingham Regionals, and Stefan Smigok, who got top 8 at the Seniors US Nationals. Jesus, that's a lot of names, but trust me, there was a lot of placings for this Pokemon, so yeah. If you want to go see all of them, you can click the link down below. But then later on, also in 2015, at Worlds when the metagame became all about chalk, Milotic stood up to the competition, but didn't place as high as his regionals and nationals appearances. It was notably used at Worlds, making 10th place on Adrian Bauman's team, 12th with Wolf Glick, 14th with Tobias Sachitsky, and 17th place by Matthias Szuchodolski. And in 2016, with all the high-powered legendaries released to run wild in the tier, Milotic understandably sat the vast majority of this year out. It's pretty tough to use when Primal Groudon and Kyogre are running the show. That said, it still managed to place 6th on Ziyong Deng's team at the Taiwan Regionals, which he used it alongside Kangaskhan, Talonflame, and Primal Groudon. So Intimidates were probably duly punished. And in Sun and Moon, a plethora of new Pokemon such as Toxapex and Tapu Bulu meant that Milotic never really stood much of a chance in overuse, and underuse got stronger and stronger, so it dropped to rarely used. And there it became the face of the tier. It was so utterly difficult to consistently take out that players everywhere were calling for its ban. With Scald, Recover, Haze, and one of Refresh, Ice Beam, or Toxic, it could destroy common Pokemon such as Feraligatr and Dual Blade with ease. Counters existed in the form of grass types, especially with Natural Cure, but those weren't easy to fit, and Refresh Milotic often ended up dueling each other. And in VGC 2017, Arcanine began being used as an effective answer to common Pokemon such as Tapu Bulu, Kartana, and Celesteela. Its ability of Intimidate and Fire typing just gave Milotic another victim, as well as an excellent partner to handle grasses, so long as another one could also handle Tapu Koko. Milo was on 5th place James Boyd's team at the Birmingham Regionals, 2nd place on Andreas Escobosa's team at the Dutch Open, 7th place on David Carr's team at the London Internationals, which that one even packed Choice Scarf, and 10th place on Yuri's team at the same tournament. And finally, in 2018, so far this year, Milotic's been doing Milotic things once more. Ben Grismer placed top 4 in the Sydney Challenge with his own Choice Scarf Milotic, even running Hidden Power Fire for Kartana, Ferrothorn, and Scizor, and Wolf Glick won the Charlotte Regionals with a more standard Wiki Berry set. It would seem that as long as there's Landorus and really intimidate spammers in general, Milotic has a niche in that meta. And that's it. So how good was Milotic actually? It completely embodies the term bulky water. It's been doing the same thing for a decade and a half now, but starting off as a top tier contender, it wasn't given too many new things to play with as the generations continued to roll in. But it managed to wriggle its way in somehow, and as the power creep grew stronger and stronger and thus forced it to drop a tier, it wound up dominating and becoming the face of its new home. And for doubles, it's always got a home in the Intimidate laden tier of VGC. This fish is a proud representative for its kind, the water type. Thanks for watching everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content, and of course, as I always say, comment on what Pokemon you want to see next. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms, yada yada yada. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.